5,000 years ago, in the river plains of southern Mesopotamia, people believed the world could speak, not in a metaphorical sense, not as poetry alone. To the Sumerians, storms, stars, dreams, floods, births, eclipses, disease, sudden victories, ruined harvests, and the strange behavior of animals could all become messages. The universe was not silent, it was filled with signals. And somewhere between the sky and the mud-brick temples, between the priests who watched the heavens and the scribes who pressed signs into wet clay, a frightening possibility took shape. What if the gods did not need to appear in order to announce their return? What if the first warning would be a sign? The phrase "final sign before the gods' return" does not appear in Sumerian texts as a simple title, not as one neat prophecy waiting to be translated from a single tablet. Archaeologists have not uncovered a clay document that says, in plain language, "When this happens, the gods will come back." That would be too easy. Ancient Mesopotamian tradition is stranger than that. Its warnings are scattered through myths, omens, royal inscriptions, hymns, laments, and stories of cities that rose beneath divine favor and collapsed beneath divine anger. The mystery is not found in one sentence. It is found in a pattern, again and again. The texts describe a world where the gods withdraw their protection, where kings lose legitimacy, where temples fall silent, where nature turns hostile, where humans no longer understand the divine order that once held civilization together. The terrifying idea is not simply that the gods might return. The deeper idea is that humanity might not recognize the sign when it comes. Imagine a scribe sitting in a temple school near the edge of a great city. The room smells of clay, reed, smoke, and dust. Around him are young students copying older tablets, repeating signs their teachers inherited from generations long dead. Outside, canals shine in the sun. Farmers move through fields of barley. Priests prepare offerings. Merchants carry lapis, cedar, wool, copper, and grain through streets crowded with life. But the scribe is copying something darker, a story of a city abandoned by its god, a lament for a temple destroyed, a memory of a flood that swallowed the world, a warning that kingship itself can descend from heaven, then be taken away. Why preserve such things? Why would a civilization so proud of its temples, canals, laws, and kings return again and again to stories of collapse? The Sumerians lived in a landscape where survival depended on order. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers could nourish the land, but they could also destroy it. Irrigation made cities possible, but it also required coordination, authority, labor, and ritual timing. In this world, civilization did not feel permanent. It felt granted. It felt maintained. It felt vulnerable. That is why the gods mattered. In Sumerian thought, the gods were not distant symbols floating above human life. They were powers woven into everything. Enlil, lord of wind and authority. Enki, lord of wisdom and the deep waters. Inanna, force of love, war, kingship, and terrible transformation. Nanna, the moon god whose light marked time. Utu, the sun god associated with justice. An, the high heaven. These names were not merely characters in stories. They represented a cosmos alive with hierarchy, intelligence, danger, and decision. Human beings lived beneath that order. Cities existed because a god had chosen them. Kings ruled because divine power allowed it. Temples were not symbolic community centers. They were houses of the gods. To neglect them was not bad manners. It was cosmic risk. So when ancient texts describe the gods leaving a city, the meaning is devastating. It is not just religious disappointment. It is the collapse of reality as that city understands it. One of the most haunting types of Mesopotamian literature is the city lament. These compositions mourn the destruction of cities and temples with a voice that feels both historical and mythic. They do not describe collapse only as military defeat. They describe abandonment. The protective deity departs. The temple becomes empty. The streets fill with grief. The city loses its divine center. What if this was one form of the sign? Not fire in the sky, not a voice from heaven, not a god walking visibly through the gates. Silence. The silence of the temple. The silence of the offering table. The silence where divine favor used to be. To modern archaeology, these laments belong to real cultural worlds shaped by invasion, political change, environmental pressure, and shifting power. Cities did fall. Dynasties did end. Temples were destroyed, rebuilt, and rededicated. Scribes did preserve trauma in ritual language. Historians can examine settlement patterns, inscriptions, administrative records, and layers of destruction. But the ancient account gives those events another dimension. For the Sumerians and their successors, disaster was not random. It had meaning. It had a divine background. When a city was destroyed, the question was not only, which army did this? It was also, why did the god allow this? And beneath that question waited another one, more dangerous and more intimate. What did we fail to see? This is where the mystery of the final sign begins to form. Ancient Mesopotamians developed one of the most elaborate cultures of signs in the ancient world. Later, Babylonian and Assyrian scholars would create vast omen collections, studying everything from celestial movements to malformed births to oil patterns on water. Not all of this belongs to the earliest Sumerian period, but it grew from a Mesopotamian worldview in which the universe could be read. Heaven and earth were connected. Events were not isolated. The visible world could reveal invisible decisions. A strange mark in the sky might be political. A flood might be moral. A dream might be instruction. A king's failure might be more than human weakness. Could it be that the gods were believed to announce their movements through disruption long before they appeared through myth? The Sumerian king list offers another piece of the puzzle. It presents kingship as something that descended from heaven, moved from city to city, disappeared during the flood, and then descended again. Historians do not treat this as a straightforward historical timeline. It mixes legendary rulers with dynastic memory. Some reigns last impossibly long. Some cities become stages in a sacred drama of authority. But as ancient ideology, it is powerful. Kingship is not invented by humans. It is given, and what is given can be removed. That single idea changes everything. If civilization itself depends on a heavenly grant, then history becomes a sequence of divine decisions. A city rises because heaven permits it. A king rules because heaven allows it. A flood interrupts the world because the human order has somehow crossed a boundary only the gods can judge. The return of divine power is not simply a future event. It is a recurring structure hidden inside the way Mesopotamians imagined time. The gods come near. The gods withdraw. The signs appear. The world changes. But here is the unsettling part. The sign is rarely understood by everyone at once. In the stories, only certain figures recognize danger early. A wise man, a priest, a king in a dream, a survivor chosen before destruction. The crowd continues living as though the world will remain familiar. This pattern appears with haunting force in flood traditions. In the Sumerian flood story, the gods decide upon a catastrophe, but a human figure receives warning and survives. The preserved text is fragmentary, and modern scholars must be careful. Much is missing. But even in broken form, it reveals a profound ancient fear the world can be judged before the world understands it has entered judgment. What if the final sign is not designed for everyone? What if it is only recognized by those trained to read the hidden order? This idea does not require modern fantasy. It is already present in the ancient habit of interpretation. The Mesopotamian scholar did not merely observe events. He read them. The world was a tablet. The heavens were script. The body, the liver, the city wall, the river, the dream, the eclipse, all could become surfaces on which divine intention appeared. For a modern viewer, this may sound like superstition, but that reaction can close the door too quickly. Ancient divination was also a system of attention. It asked people to notice patterns, to connect crisis with conduct, to treat power as accountable to cosmic forces, to imagine that history was not meaningless noise. The danger is that signs can be misread. And if signs can be misread, then a civilization can walk toward its own ruin while believing everything is normal. The clay tablets do not give us a single final sign. They give us a world where final signs are possible. A world where abandoned temples matter. A world where broken kingship matters. A world where floods remember divine anger. A world where the sky speaks in strange rhythms. A world where the gods may be absent, but never irrelevant. This is why the phrase "before the gods return" carries such force. In popular imagination, it may suggest beings descending from the heavens in visible form. In ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian thought, the idea may be more subtle and more unsettling. Divine return could mean restored order, renewed kingship, a temple rebuilt, a city chosen again, a sacred pattern reactivated after chaos. But modern interpretations move in many directions. Some see these stories as religious memory. Some see political theology, where rulers use divine language to explain power. Some see mythic reflections of environmental disaster. Some see psychological truths about collapse and renewal. Others, outside mainstream scholarship. Imagine lost knowledge or literal beings who shaped humanity. Those interpretations remain speculative and should not be confused with what archaeology has established. Still, even when stripped of exaggeration, the mystery remains. Why did ancient scribes preserve so many stories in which civilization depends on signs from powers beyond ordinary sight? Why did they imagine that gods could leave? Why did they believe disaster could arrive first as a message? There is an image worth holding in the mind. A clay tablet, broken at the edges, found after thousands of years in the earth. The marks are small. Some are missing. The hand that made them is gone. The temple that taught them is dust. The god whose name appears on the tablet has no living priesthood in the old Sumerian sense. And yet, the warning still reaches us, not as a simple prophecy, not as proof that ancient beings are coming back, but as a question carved into the oldest memory of civilization. When order begins to fail, when leaders lose truth, when sacred places fall silent, when the heavens are watched with fear, when people no longer know whether disaster is accident or message, are they witnessing only history, or are they standing inside the first shadow of a sign? Imagine trying to measure the will of heaven with a shadow, not with a telescope, not with a machine, not with the instruments of modern science, but with the slow movement of the moon, the rising of stars, the swelling of rivers, the timing of offerings, the angle of light on temple walls, and the terrifying belief that the world above was not separate from the world below. For the people of ancient Sumer, the sky was not empty space. It was a realm of order. Every movement mattered. The moon did not simply appear at night. It measured sacred time. The sun did not simply rise. It revealed justice, visibility, and judgment. The planets were not wandering stones. They were luminous bodies tied to divine forces, watched with reverence and unease. The calendar was not merely practical. It was religious. It told priests when to bring offerings, farmers when to trust the seasons, kings when to perform rites, and cities when to remember that human life moved under a greater pattern. What if the first sign of divine return was not destruction, but misalignment? What if the warning began when heaven and earth no longer matched? This idea lived at the heart of Sumerian civilization. Cities were not built randomly across the river plain. They gathered around temples, and temples gathered around gods. At the center of the city stood the sacred house, the place where divine presence was invited, fed, honored, and feared. The temple was architecture, economy, politics, memory, and mystery at once. To modern archaeology, temples were institutions with enormous power. They managed land, stored grain, employed workers, received offerings, sponsored crafts, and preserved written records. They were engines of administration. But to the ancient mind, this practical role did not reduce their holiness. It proved it. The temple organized life because the god organized reality. Above the flat plains of southern Mesopotamia rose platforms and temple towers that seemed to pull the human world upward. The later ziggurat became the most famous form of this sacred elevation, a mountain made by human hands in a land with almost no mountains. It was not a modern observatory in the simple sense. Archaeologists do not describe Sumerian temple towers as scientific observatories built only for stargazing, but their symbolism was unmistakable. They lifted sacred space toward the heavens. They placed the god's house above ordinary streets. They made the city feel anchored to the sky, and that is where the mystery deepens. Why would a civilization build upward in a landscape that spread outward? Why turn mud brick into a sacred mountain? The answer may lie in the Sumerian hunger for connection. Heaven was not merely above. Heaven was the source of authority. Kingship descended from heaven. Divine powers shaped society. Sacred time was read from the sky. A temple did not just stand in a city. It connected the city to a cosmic order that had to be maintained. The Sumerians had a word that opens one of the strangest doors in their worldview. The Me were divine powers, decrees, or sacred patterns associated with civilization. They were not laws in the ordinary legal sense. They were the mysterious qualities that made human culture possible: kingship, priesthood, wisdom, music, sexuality, craft, warfare, judgment, and many other forces of organized life. In myths, these powers could be possessed, transferred, guarded, and sought. This is not the language of a people who thought civilization was simply invented by clever humans. It is the language of a people who believed civilization was entrusted. And if civilization was entrusted, it could be lost. A viewer might picture a temple courtyard at dusk. The last heat of the day rises from baked brick. A priest watches the moon's thin crescent appear in the violet sky. Workers carry baskets of grain. A scribe records deliveries on a clay tablet. Somewhere in the sanctuary, offerings are prepared for the god. Everything seems ordinary, yet every action depends on timing. The right day, the right ritual, the right measure, the right name spoken in the right place. Could a missed ritual become more than human error? Could a calendar mistake become a crack in the bond between city and god? Ancient Mesopotamian religion paid intense attention to regularity. The gods were honored through repeated actions, not only emotional belief, food offerings, hymns, purification, festivals, and temple maintenance made divine presence part of daily life. This was not faith as a private feeling. It was faith as a public rhythm. The rhythm mattered because the universe itself was imagined as ordered. The moon god, Nana, worshipped especially at Ur, marked time with his cycle. His crescent was one of the great symbols of Mesopotamian religion. The sun god, Utu, crossed the heavens and became associated with justice, because nothing could hide forever from the light. Inanna, linked in later tradition with the planet Venus, carried a more unpredictable force, beauty and terror, desire and battle, morning and evening appearance, absence and return. These divine patterns gave the sky personality, but they also made the sky dangerous. When something unusual happened above, it could feel like a disturbance in the divine order. A darkened moon, a strange celestial appearance, an unexpected storm, or a failure of seasonal timing could stir anxiety. Later, Mesopotamian scholars developed large omen traditions that treated heavenly phenomena as messages, especially for the king and the land. Those collections belong mostly to later Babylonian and Assyrian intellectual culture, not the earliest Sumerian moment in a simple way. Still, they grew from a long Mesopotamian conviction that heaven and earth mirrored each other. The sky could announce trouble on earth, the king's body, the city's fate, the river's behavior, and the stars above belonged to one connected field of meaning. Modern historians approach this carefully. They do not say Sumerian priests possessed modern astronomy. They did not use telescopes. They did not calculate space in the way contemporary science does. Yet they were disciplined observers of time. Agricultural life required it. Ritual life demanded it. Administration recorded it. The sky became a calendar, and the calendar became a sacred instrument. That instrument carried a frightening implication. If the heavens measured the proper time for worship, rule, and renewal, then disorder in heaven could suggest disorder in kingship, temple, or society. The return of the gods, in this kind of worldview, might not begin with gods appearing visibly among humans. It might begin with the restoration of correct measure, a calendar repaired, a temple rebuilt, a rightful ruler confirmed. A ritual performed at the precise moment when heaven seemed ready to receive it. This is why royal building inscriptions matter. When rulers built or restored temples, they often described the project in religious terms. The king was not merely constructing a monument to his own ambition. He was fulfilling divine instruction, returning order to the city, pleasing the god, and securing blessing for the land. The building itself became a sign that the connection between heaven and earth was being repaired. One of the most evocative examples comes from the ruler Gudea of Lagash, whose inscriptions describe dream visions and divine instruction connected with the building of Ningirsu's temple. The details belong to a specific historical and literary tradition, not a universal prophecy. Yet their atmosphere is extraordinary. A ruler receives a mysterious dream. Divine figures appear. A temple plan is revealed. Sacred construction becomes the answer to a cosmic command. What does that tell us? It tells us that in Mesopotamian imagination, the gods could return through structure, through plan, through measurement, through the correct shaping of sacred space. A ruined or neglected temple was not just a damaged building. It was a broken relationship. A rebuilt temple was not just urban renewal. It was divine re-entry into the human world. This changes the meaning of a sign. Modern people often imagine signs as dramatic interruptions, lightning, comets, voices, disasters. But ancient Sumerian religious life also recognized quieter signs: the right dream, the right foundation, the right measurement of a sanctuary, the right alignment of ritual time. The god's return could be approached through patient precision, yet the precision was surrounded by fear. Because what happened if the measurements were wrong? What happened if the king misunderstood the dream? What happened if priests performed the rites but the god did not accept them? What happened if the temple stood tall, but heaven remained silent? Here, the Sumerian world becomes psychologically powerful. It reveals a civilization obsessed not only with divine presence, but with divine approval. To build was not enough. To rule was not enough. To offer was not enough. The deeper question was always whether the unseen order had agreed. The gods were not controlled by ritual. They were approached through ritual. That difference mattered. A city could do everything visible and still fear the invisible answer. This may explain why Mesopotamian culture became so attentive to signs. A sign reduced uncertainty. It gave shape to anxiety. It allowed priests, diviners, kings, and scribes to say the hidden world has spoken, whether through the sky, a dream, a ritual outcome, or the condition of a sacred object. The gods had given some trace of their will, but traces are not the same as clarity. The more a civilization searches for signs, the more frightening ambiguity becomes. A crescent moon appears late. Is it weather, calculation, or warning? A temple animal behaves strangely. Is it chance, disease, or message? A king dreams of a divine figure. Is it command, temptation, or confusion? A city prospers while neglecting justice. Is divine patience being mistaken for approval? The Sumerians did not leave us a manual that answers every question. What they left is more haunting a way of seeing reality, in which the final sign might be hidden inside ordinary order, breaking by 1 degree. Not enough to terrify everyone, enough to be noticed by those watching. In the temple schools, young scribes learned to copy signs with precision. Every wedge mattered. A misplaced mark could change a word. A broken edge could conceal a name. A damaged line could transform certainty into mystery. The act of writing itself mirrored the larger world. Reality was readable, but fragile. Meaning could survive for millennia, yet arrive incomplete. The same was true of heaven. The sky seemed readable, but never fully possessed. The gods could be named, praised, invoked, and served, but not trapped. They revealed order, yet remained beyond human command. And perhaps that is why the idea of a final sign is so powerful. It belongs to a world where the greatest terror was not that the gods were absent, but that they were measuring humanity in silence, not measuring with compassion alone, not measuring with anger alone, measuring whether the city still remembered the pattern, measuring whether kingship still served justice, measuring whether temples were houses of presence or monuments of pride, measuring whether human beings had mistaken divine patience for divine surrender. Under the wide Mesopotamian sky, this thought must have been almost unbearable. Every night, the heavens returned. Every month, the moon renewed itself. Every year, festivals came again. The rhythms continued, and their continuation could feel like mercy. But rhythms can also conceal countdowns. If heaven measured the earth, then earth was always being weighed. If sacred time governed human order, then disorder was never merely political or agricultural, it was cosmic. And if the gods were ever to return, visibly or invisibly, mythically or ritually, Symbolically or in the imagination of the faithful, the first sign might be a failure of measure, a city out of rhythm, a king out of balance, a temple out of alignment, a people no longer able to read the sky that once taught them how to live. And the most disturbing question is this: when heaven gives its warning quietly, who is awake enough to notice? What does a city hear when it believes a god is speaking, not a voice from the clouds, not thunder shaped into human language, not a command written across the sky for everyone to see? In ancient Sumer, a city listened through rituals, dreams, omens, temple songs, royal ceremonies, priestly offices, sacred statues, and the quiet discipline of daily offerings. The god did not need to shout. The god had a house. The god had servants. The god had festivals. The god had a name carved, sung, feared, and repeated until the identity of an entire city became inseparable from divine presence. A Sumerian city was never just a settlement. It was a listening machine. Its streets, gates, canals, workshops, storehouses, and sanctuaries formed a living system organized around a sacred center. To modernize, the ruins of Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, and Ur can appear silent: broken walls, fallen platforms, fragments of pottery, clay tablets pulled from dust. But to the people who lived there, these places were alive with attention. Each city had its divine patron, and that patron was not an ornament. The god was the hidden authority behind the city's fate. Could a city lose its god by forgetting how to listen? This question leads into one of the strangest features of Sumerian civilization. The gods were not worshipped in the abstract alone. They belonged to places. Enki was deeply associated with Eridu, the ancient city linked to the sweet waters of wisdom. Inanna's presence burned fiercely in Uruk, where power, sexuality, war, and kingship gathered around her cult. Enlil's authority dominated Nippur, a religious center whose importance reached far beyond ordinary political control. Ningirsu stood at the heart of Lagash tradition, connected with warfare, justice, kingship, and the protection of fields. Each city carried a different spiritual personality. Eridu felt like a memory of origins. Uruk felt like divine intensity made urban. Nippur felt like command descending from the highest authority. Lagash felt like sacred responsibility tied to territory and rule. These are modern descriptions shaped from texts and archaeology, but they reveal something real about the Sumerian imagination. Divine power was not evenly spread like sunlight. It concentrated, it chose, it dwelled. And if divine power could dwell, then it could also depart. Picture Uruk in its ancient glory. Mud brick walls rising under a brutal sun. Processional ways filled with movement. Temple precincts where the ordinary city gave way to sacred space. Scribes carrying tablets. Musicians preparing hymns. Workers hauling offerings. Priests guarding boundaries between human life and divine presence. Somewhere within the sacred complex, the statue of the goddess was treated not as a decoration, but as the earthly focus of a living relationship. To modern archaeology, a cult statue was crafted material: wood, metal, stone, precious coverings, ritual care. To the ancient worshipper, the statue could become the presence point of the deity through consecration and ritual. This distinction is essential. The object was made by human hands, but the presence it invited was not considered human. That made the statue dangerous, holy, and politically powerful. Whoever served the god stood close to the source of legitimacy. This is where religion and power became almost impossible to separate. A king did not merely govern people, He served the divine order of the city. A ruler who repaired a temple was presenting himself as a restorer of cosmic balance. A ruler who neglected a temple risked appearing blind to the very power that allowed him to rule. The city listened through its priests, but the king also had to listen. His legitimacy depended on hearing correctly. What if political collapse began as spiritual deafness? The ancient texts often present kings and cities as judged by their relationship to the gods. This does not mean every historical event had a single religious cause. Modern historians examine economic pressures, military conflict, irrigation stress, trade networks, population movements, and environmental change. Yet ancient Sumerian and later Mesopotamian writings often placed these pressures inside a divine narrative. A city was not merely conquered. It was abandoned, judged, chosen, restored, or transferred within a sacred order. Nippur is especially revealing. Unlike some cities that rose primarily through military or economic strength, Nippur held immense religious authority because of Enlil. Control of Nippur mattered to rulers who wanted legitimacy across Mesopotamia. To honor Enlil was to seek recognition from the divine lord of command. The city's political value was tied to its sacred status. Nippur shows how a place could become powerful not simply because armies camped there, but because everyone believed heaven listened there. That idea changes the meaning of geography. A sacred city becomes more than a dot on a map. It becomes a doorway. A king who enters it does not only enter an urban space, he approaches a judgment seat. Offerings made there are not just economic transfers. They are attempts to keep the channels between human order and divine authority open. Could the final sign be the closing of those channels? In City Laments, one of the most painful images is the abandoned sanctuary. The temple no longer functions as the world's center. Ritual objects are disrupted. Priestly service collapses. The sacred house is exposed to violence and emptiness. The city becomes like a body without breath. The tragedy is not only that people die or buildings fall. The tragedy is that the God's house no longer answers. This is a different kind of apocalypse. Not the end of the planet, the end of relationship. For a Sumerian city, to be unheard by its God may have been worse than defeat. Defeat could be endured if the God remained. Exile could be survived if divine favor returned. But if the deity withdrew completely, the city's identity dissolved. Its name might remain in records. Its bricks might remain in the ground. But its soul had gone elsewhere. Eridu carries another kind of mystery. In later Mesopotamian tradition, Eridu was remembered as one of the most ancient cities, associated with beginnings, wisdom, and Enki's watery domain beneath the earth. The archaeological site reveals deep antiquity, with temple levels showing long continuity of sacred activity. What makes Eridu so haunting is not only its age, but its symbolic atmosphere. It suggests that Mesopotamians imagined wisdom rising from depth, not from height alone. Beneath the visible world lay the Abzu, the deep freshwater realm connected to Enki. Here the city listened downward, not to stars, not to mountain peaks, but to hidden waters. What kind of sign comes from the deep? Enki's myths often portray him as clever, protective, ambiguous, and difficult to contain. He is associated with crafts, wisdom, magic, creation, and secret knowledge. In some traditions, he helps humanity when other gods bring danger. But he is not a simple hero in a modern sense. He belongs to a world where divine intelligence can be generous and unpredictable at the same time. A city devoted to such a god would imagine knowledge as something concealed, fluid, and dangerous. Wisdom might save humanity, Wisdom might also reveal what humanity was never meant to know. This introduces a new tension in the search for a final sign. Not every sign is public. Some signs belong to specialists, priests, dream interpreters, lamentation singers, diviners, and scribes could carry knowledge unavailable to ordinary people. Writing itself created a class of people who could preserve the speech of the dead, the commands of kings, the names of gods, and the memory of disaster. A tablet is a quiet object, but in Sumer, a tablet could outlive a city. The spoken ritual fades. The temple roof collapses. The offering smoke disappears. The priest's voice is gone. Yet the clay remains, holding marks made by a reed stylus pressed by a hand that never imagined a modern reader. This creates one of the great ironies of ancient civilization. The gods may have fallen silent, but the records of listening survived. What were the scribes trying to preserve? Not only administration, not only myths, not only praise. They preserved a map of attention. They recorded which god belonged to which city, which offerings mattered, which kings claimed divine approval, which catastrophes were remembered as more than political events. They preserved the ancient belief that human society must listen or become lost. Lagash adds yet another dimension. Texts from the world of Lagash reveal rulers deeply concerned with justice, land, temple property, divine instruction, and social order. Ningirsu, the city's great divine figure, was not merely a warlike protector. His cult was tied to the integrity of the land and the ruler's duty to act properly. In this environment, the sign of divine displeasure might not be celestial at all. It might appear in injustice, fields seized wrongly, temples exploited, workers oppressed, oaths broken, the poor ignored. What if the gods return, not because humans forget rituals, but because humans corrupt the order those rituals were meant to protect? That thought carries enormous force. In many ancient societies, religion was not separated from justice in the modern way. A broken social order could be a broken sacred order. A corrupt ruler did not merely fail politically. He disturbed the bond between the city and the divine power that gave the city meaning. This makes the final sign morally unsettling. It may not be hidden in the heavens. It may be visible in the marketplace. A dishonest weight, a stolen boundary stone, a temple turned into an instrument of greed, a king who speaks the names of gods but no longer fears them, a city that still performs ritual while losing the justice that made ritual meaningful. The gods might not need to send a monster, comet, or flood. The sign might be the city itself becoming false. Still, ancient Sumerian cities did not imagine divine presence as only punishment. The gods could also restore, a temple rebuilt, a cult renewed, a statue returned, a city purified, a hymn sung again in the correct place. All could become signs that the relationship was healing. That is what makes the evidence so complex. The same city could be guilty and beloved, ruined and chosen, silent and ready to hear again. This is not simple prophecy. It is sacred drama. The city listens. The city forgets. The city suffers. The city cries out. The city waits. And somewhere in that waiting, the divine world may answer. But the answer is rarely clean. A god's return might bless one city and doom another. A ruler's restoration might be another ruler's catastrophe. A sacred victory might look like invasion to the defeated. Ancient people knew this ambiguity. Their texts do not describe a comfortable universe. They describe a universe full of power, meaning, beauty, terror, and uncertainty. stand among the ruins in imagination. The sun lowers over broken brick. The wind moves dust through spaces where hymns once echoed. A bird crosses the sky above a roofless sanctuary. Beneath the ground, tablets sleep in fragments. The city no longer hears its god in the old way. Yet the names remain. Inanna, Enki, Enlil, Ningirsu, Nana, Utu, names once spoken with offerings, fear, hope, and trembling precision. If a city is a listening machine, then ruins are not mute. They ask what happens when a civilization stops hearing the powers it believes gave it life. They ask whether collapse begins in armies, drought, politics, or in a silence no one wants to name. And the most haunting question remains when the god of a city grows quiet. Is that absence the end of the story, or the first sign that something unseen is preparing to return? What if the oldest warning was not written for the wicked, but for the one person who would survive? The Sumerian flood story does not arrive as a perfect, complete manuscript. It reaches the modern world damaged, broken, and partial, like a voice speaking through a wall of dust. Lines are missing. Names are debated. Scenes appear and disappear in fragments. Yet within the surviving pieces, one of humanity's most enduring fears rises from the clay. The world can be destroyed by powers that once allowed it to exist. The flood is not only water, it is judgment moving through nature. It is the collapse of cities, fields, animals, homes, temples, and memory beneath a force no human king can command. It is the moment when civilization discovers that its walls are not ultimate, its rituals are not automatic shields, and its achievements can vanish under a sky that no longer seems merciful. Why would ancient scribes preserve such a terrifying memory? The Sumerian flood tradition centers around a figure usually known as Ziusudra, a king or priestly ruler connected with survival through divine warning. The text is fragmentary, so every detail must be handled carefully. It does not allow modern readers to reconstruct every scene with certainty. What it does reveal is enough to disturb the imagination. The gods decide upon a devastating flood. A human receives a warning. Survival depends not on strength, weapons, or wealth, but on hearing the message in time. That detail matters. The strongest do not survive because they are strong. The richest do not survive because they are rich. The ruler does not survive because his city is powerful. He survives because a hidden warning reaches him. In Mesopotamian thought, this is a profound reversal. Human civilization prides itself on building, organizing, storing, measuring, and ruling. But in the flood story, none of those systems can stop the waters. The sign comes first, and only recognition gives life a path through catastrophe. What kind of world creates a story like this? Southern Mesopotamia was a land shaped by rivers that were both blessing and threat. The Tigris and Euphrates did not behave like the Nile in its more predictable ancient cycle. Their floods could be sudden, destructive, and difficult to control. Cities depended on canals, levees, irrigation channels, and coordinated labor. Water made agriculture possible. Water made urban life possible. Water also reminded everyone that human order stood on unstable ground. Archaeology has found flood deposits at some Mesopotamian sites, though not evidence for a single global flood covering the entire Earth. This distinction is important. Archaeologists can identify local and regional flooding events. Historians can study how river disasters shaped memory. Ancient texts, however, transform water into cosmic judgment. What archaeology shows as environmental danger, mythology remembers as divine decision. The two are not the same. but they can speak to each other. Imagine a city in the lowlands, rain in the distance, rivers swelling, canals overflowing, mud walls softening, animals restless, families gathering grain, tools, and children, priests trying to protect sacred objects, scribes carrying tablets to higher rooms. The smell of wet earth turns from relief to terror. The sound of water grows until it becomes the only voice in the world. To those who survived such disasters, the question would not be only what happened. The deeper question would be why. Why this city? Why this generation? Why did the gods allow the river to cross the boundary between life and destruction? The flood tradition gives that terror a sacred form. The human world is not merely overwhelmed by weather. It is judged by powers who stand above human explanation. Yet the warning to Ziusudra creates a strange mercy hidden inside terror. If the gods decide destruction, why warn anyone at all? Could the warning itself be the sign of a divided divine world? In later Akkadian traditions, especially in the Atrahasis epic and the flood account within the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story becomes richer in detail. These are not Sumerian texts in the narrowest sense, but they belong to the broader Mesopotamian inheritance of the flood myth. In those accounts, the gods are not always united in emotion or purpose. Some regret. Some fear the consequences. One divine figure, associated with wisdom, warns the human survivor. The flood becomes not only punishment, but a crisis among the gods themselves. This creates one of the most fascinating questions in ancient mythology. Was the final sign a message from the gods, or a secret passed against the decision of other gods? The Sumerian fragment does not give every answer. Still, the pattern is powerful. Divine knowledge reaches one human through an indirect path. The warning is not shouted openly to the whole population. It comes through secrecy, dreamlike speech, or a protected channel. The world is endangered, but the knowledge needed for survival is restricted. That idea is frightening because it suggests catastrophe may not be invisible. It may simply be unread. The people continue their ordinary routines. Markets open. Fires burn in homes. Children play near canals. Officials count grain. Priests recite hymns. The sky darkens. The river rises. Perhaps a few notice. Perhaps most do not. The final sign may not look final when it first appears. A small change in water level, a message in a dream, a god's instruction heard by one man, a command to prepare when preparation seems absurd. This is why flood traditions around the world have fascinated comparative scholars. Mesopotamia, the Hebrew Bible, Greek traditions, and many other cultures preserve stories of overwhelming waters and chosen survivors. These similarities do not prove one single event in a simple literal sense. Some traditions influence each other through transmission. Some may reflect common human experience with flood disasters. Some express the symbolic power of water as chaos, cleansing, death, and rebirth. But the Mesopotamian flood story is among the oldest written forms of this pattern. That makes it a doorway into the ancient imagination. In the flood story, water is more than punishment. It erases boundaries. The line between river and street disappears. The line between field and canal disappears. The line between human planning and divine power disappears. When the flood arrives, the world returns to something like pre-creation chaos, a condition where order has dissolved and only the decision of the gods can restore meaning. This connects to a deep ancient fear. Civilization is not natural. It must be maintained. Canals must be cleared. Temples must be served. Laws must be enforced. Fields must be measured. Rulers must be legitimate. Rituals must be performed. Generations must remember. The flood represents what happens when all maintenance fails at once. But was the flood caused by human wrongdoing? Here, the ancient evidence is complex. The Sumerian flood text is too damaged to provide a full moral explanation in the way later readers might expect. Later Mesopotamian versions sometimes emphasize human noise or disturbance, not sin in a simple modern moral category. The gods become troubled by humanity's presence. This is very different from later religious traditions, where moral corruption receives more explicit focus. That difference matters. The Mesopotamian gods were not always imagined as perfect moral judges. They were powerful, personal, political, emotional, and sometimes unpredictable. Their decisions could reflect order, irritation, necessity, fear, or conflict. The flood, then, is not only about humanity failing goodness, it may also reflect humanity becoming too great, too numerous, too loud, too disruptive for the divine world that once authorized civilization. What if the danger is not only evil? What if the danger is excess? Too many cities, too much noise, too much ambition, too much confidence in human systems, too much forgetting that existence itself was granted. That possibility turns the flood into a warning against arrogance. Not arrogance as simple pride, but arrogance as misreading the human place in the cosmos. A civilization can mistake survival for independence. It can assume that because canals worked last year, they will work forever. Because offerings were accepted yesterday, they will be accepted tomorrow. Because kingship stands now, it cannot be removed. The flood says otherwise. Everything granted can be taken back. Still, the survival of Ziusudra prevents the story from becoming pure despair. He becomes a vessel of continuity. Through him, memory passes through destruction. The ancient world does not end completely. It is interrupted, purified, wounded, and remade. This is why flood mythology so often combines terror with renewal. The waters destroy, but they also reset. They drown one age and allow another to begin. Modern interpretation often sees in this a psychological structure. Flood stories speak to the human fear of being overwhelmed by forces beyond control. They also speak to the hope that meaning can survive catastrophe. The boat, ark, or protected space becomes a symbol of memory carried through chaos. It holds life, order, and instruction when the outside world dissolves. In Mesopotamian imagination, the survivor is not merely lucky. He becomes the keeper of the sign. He knows what others did not know. He has heard what others failed to hear. He carries a terrible knowledge the gods can decide against the world, and one warning can divide the lost from the living. This brings the mystery closer to the idea of divine return. A flood is not only a departure of order, it is also an event that demands restoration. Once the waters fall, what returns cities must be rebuilt. Offerings must resume. Names must be spoken again. Kingship must descend again. The gods do not simply destroy and vanish. Their authority remains present in the wounded world that follows. The return may not look like arrival. It may look like the first altar raised on mud, the first fire lit in a broken land, the first prayer spoken by a survivor who remembers the old names, the first city built under the fear that the waters could come again. That is a chilling form of return because it suggests the gods are most deeply recognized not during prosperity, but during recovery. When everything stable has been stripped away, the survivor learns which powers still remain. But another question hides beneath the mud. If Ziusudra was warned, why not everyone? Was the sign too subtle? Was the decision too secret? Was the world already too deaf? Or was the story teaching that survival belongs not to those who control history, but to those who can receive a message that others dismiss? The flood tradition does not hand us a simple code for predicting the future. It gives something more haunting and ancient memory, that the last ordinary day may feel ordinary, that the final warning may be given quietly, and that the line between civilization and chaos may be thinner than any city wants to believe. The rivers that fed Sumer also threatened it. The gods who granted kingship could interrupt it. The temples that held divine presence could be drowned in silence. And one human, listening where others did not, could carry the world through the waters. So the deepest question is not whether ancient people remembered a flood. The deepest question is why they imagined that only one listener heard the warning in time. What if destiny was not an idea, but an object that could be held, stolen, hidden, and used? In Mesopotamian mythology, power is often imagined as something more solid than modern readers expect. Authority is not only emotional. Wisdom is not only personal insight. Kingship is not only politics. Divine order can be carried in names, symbols, decrees, ritual objects, sacred garments, temple plans, and mysterious tablets. The invisible becomes visible. The abstract becomes touchable. Among the most fascinating of these symbols is the Tablet of Destinies. It must be understood carefully. Archaeologists have not found one physical artifact that can be identified as the actual Tablet of Destinies from myth. It is not sitting in a museum as a magical object with the future written across its surface. It belongs to ancient literature, theology, and symbolic imagination. Yet inside those stories, it represents one of the highest forms of power in the universe, the authority to command fate. That idea is almost impossible to overstate. If a god possesses the Tablet of Destinies, he does not merely know what will happen. He participates in the ordering of what must happen. He stands near the machinery of creation itself. He holds the authorization that lets the cosmos remain structured instead of falling into confusion. So what happens when that tablet is stolen? The myth of Anzu gives one of the most dramatic answers. In the broader Mesopotamian tradition, Anzu is a monstrous bird or lion-headed eagle figure associated with storm, wild power, and rebellion. In one version of the story, Anzu steals the Tablet of Destinies from Enlil, the great authority of the divine assembly. Once Anzu takes it, the order of the gods is shaken. The universe enters crisis. Divine command has been removed from its rightful place. This is not a simple monster story. It is a nightmare about authority detached from legitimacy. Picture the scene as ancient imagination might have felt it. Enlil's chamber stands in sacred stillness. The powers of heaven and earth rest under divine control. Then, in a moment of impossible violation, Anzu seizes the tablet and flees. The sky darkens. The gods panic. Commands no longer flow correctly. The structure that keeps reality stable has been interrupted by theft. What if the most dangerous sign is not a flood, a war, or an eclipse, but stolen destiny? A civilization can survive hardship when the center still holds. It can endure bad harvests, enemy raids, disease, and grief if it believes order remains above the storm. But when the source of order itself is compromised, fear becomes metaphysical. The question is no longer, what disaster is coming? The question becomes, who now controls the pattern? In the myth, the gods seek a champion to recover the tablet. The warrior chosen in later tradition is Ninurta, a heroic divine figure associated with battle, farming, storms, and restoration of order. His confrontation with Anzu is more than combat. It is a struggle to return authority to its rightful structure. The monster has wings, force, and stolen power. Ninurta must defeat not only a creature, but a disorder that has reached into the highest levels of existence. Ancient texts describe divine conflict in forms that may sound strange to modern ears. Gods argue, panic, plot, refuse danger, seek champions, make promises. Their world is not a smooth philosophical system. It is alive with drama. Yet the drama carries a serious idea. Cosmic order is not automatic. It must be defended. That is the hidden terror of the Tablet of Destinies. The universe can be interrupted. Modern historians read these myths in several ways. Some see them as theological narratives explaining divine hierarchy. Some see political symbolism, where possession of cosmic authority mirrors royal legitimacy on Earth. Some read the monster as chaos, rebellion, or uncontrolled force. Comparative scholars sometimes connect such myths with a wider ancient Near Eastern pattern in which a storm or warrior deity defeats a chaos figure and secures kingship. But the myth's psychological force does not depend on only one interpretation. Everyone understands the fear of power in the wrong hands. A seal in the wrong hands can command soldiers. A throne in the wrong hands can ruin a nation. A sacred office in the wrong hands can corrupt worship. A written decree in the wrong hands can transform law into violence. Mesopotamian scribes lived in a world where documents mattered intensely. Clay tablets recorded land, labor, grain, taxes, offerings, contracts, lawsuits, royal commands, and temple property. Writing was administration, memory, and control. For a culture that trusted tablets to preserve order, a divine tablet controlling destiny would be the ultimate image, the highest document, the decree above all decrees, the cosmic record whose theft means reality itself has been falsified. Could this be why the symbol is so haunting? It takes a familiar object, a tablet of clay, and magnifies it beyond human scale. Scribes knew what tablets could do. They could preserve a king's command long after his voice faded. They could prove ownership. They could bind agreements. They could record offerings to gods. They could outlast the living. In myth, that same technology becomes sacred and terrifying. If human tablets organize society, the divine tablet organizes existence. Now imagine it broken, not physically shattered, but broken in authority. A tablet can be intact and still become dangerous if its power is misused. That is why the phrase broken destinies carries such weight. Fate may not be broken because the object cracks. Fate is broken when decree separates from rightful wisdom, when command separates from justice, when authority separates from divine balance. This is where the ancient myth begins to feel uncomfortably modern. A society can continue functioning on the surface while its deepest authorizations become hollow. Officials still issue orders. Temples still stand. Armies still march. Markets still open. Songs are still sung. But somewhere, legitimacy has been stolen. The symbols remain, while the meaning has fled. What sign would reveal that? Not always smoke. Not always invasion. Sometimes the sign is inversion. The false holder sits where the rightful guardian should be. The unworthy voice gives commands. Power wears sacred clothing without sacred restraint. The old forms remain visible, but something within them has been taken. In Mesopotamian stories, destiny is also connected to naming and decree. To name something is not merely to label it. It is to place it within order. To decree fate is to assign position, role, limit, and future. Creation itself depends on distinction. Heaven separated from earth. fresh water from salt water, city from wilderness, temple from street, king from subject, human from divine. Chaos begins when distinctions collapse. The theft of the Tablet of Destinies is a mythic version of that collapse. The wrong being gains access to the power of decree. The boundary between legitimate rule and violent seizure is violated. Until the tablet is restored, even the gods cannot rest easily. This raises a disturbing possibility about the final sign. Perhaps it is not the arrival of a strange new power. Perhaps it is the old power appearing in a distorted form, a counterfeit destiny, a sacred symbol held by a rebel, a command that sounds divine but leads toward ruin. Ancient listeners would have understood the danger. Their world depended on correct transmission. A ritual had to be spoken properly. A royal inscription had to preserve the king's claim. A boundary marker had to remain in place. A divine name had to be honored. Errors were not only mistakes. Some errors threatened order. The myth of Anzu turns that anxiety into cosmic drama. A stolen tablet is the ultimate error, deliberate and catastrophic. It is bureaucracy raised to mythology, theology shaped by the fear that the universe itself has a legal center, and someone has robbed it. Yet the story also contains hope. The tablet can be recovered. Destiny can be restored. The gods can regain command. Order can return, but not peacefully. It requires confrontation. Something false must be defeated. Something stolen must be carried back. Something terrifying must be named as rebellion, not merely power. This is a crucial distinction. Ancient Mesopotamian myth does not worship strength alone. Anzu is powerful, but power does not make him rightful. He has the tablet, but possession does not equal legitimacy. This is one of the oldest political and spiritual warnings in written imagination. The one who holds authority may not be the one authorized to hold it. How would a people know the difference? That question may have haunted temples and palaces alike. A successful ruler could claim divine favor. A conquering king could restore temples and write inscriptions praising the gods. A rebel could become a king. A dynasty could rewrite memory. The line between destiny and ambition was not always clear. This is why the divine assembly matters in myth. Authority must be recognized within a larger order. It cannot be reduced to force. The Tablet of Destinies belongs to a cosmic structure, not to whoever is bold enough to seize it. That idea turns myth into warning. When power escapes accountability, the world tilts. The clay tablet becomes a mirror. It asks who writes reality, who controls the decree, who decides which city rises and which city falls, who names justice, who names rebellion, and who benefits when the names are changed. For ancient scribes, these were not abstract questions. They lived under kings. They served temples. They copied old stories while regimes changed around them. They knew that writing could preserve truth, but also glorify power. They knew tablets could remember, but tablets could also be commissioned by rulers who wanted future generations to see them as chosen. So the myth of the stolen destiny tablet carries a hidden unease. Even sacred language can be captured. Even divine symbols can be used by the wrong hands. Even destiny can be claimed by those who were never meant to possess it. The final sign, then, may not be a disaster descending from the sky. It may be a confusion spreading through the world of meaning. People no longer know who speaks truth. Sacred offices become instruments of domination. Decrees multiply, but wisdom disappears. Authority remains loud, yet legitimacy becomes silent. And in that silence, the ancient myth whispers its most unsettling question when destiny is stolen. How long does it take the world to realize that fate itself has changed owners? Why do the gods grow distant? This is one of the quietest and most unsettling mysteries in Mesopotamian tradition. The ancient texts do not always describe the divine world as absent. They describe gods who build, command, desire, rage, bless, punish, feast, argue, decree, and enter into relationships with cities and kings. The divine realm is crowded with personalities. It is political. It is emotional. It is powerful. It is never simple. Yet there is a strange movement inside the old stories. The gods are everywhere, and then somehow they are not. Their names remain. Their temples remain. Their rituals remain. Their statues are washed, dressed, fed, and carried in ceremony. Their hymns are sung. Their symbols shine on seals and boundary stones. But the direct closeness of the earliest sacred world begins to feel veiled. The gods still rule, yet they seem harder to reach. They still decide, yet their decisions arrive through dreams, omens, disasters, and specialists who claim to understand signs. What happened to the age when gods seemed near enough to shape human destiny directly? The Anunnaki stand at the center of this mystery, but even the name must be handled with care. In popular culture, the Anunnaki are often portrayed as extraterrestrial beings, ancient visitors, or hidden engineers of human civilization. Those ideas belong to modern speculation. They are not established by archaeology, and they are not how scholars normally interpret Sumerian religion. In ancient Mesopotamian texts, the Anunna or Anunnaki are divine beings, a group of gods associated with high cosmic authority in some traditions and with judgment or the underworld in others. Their identity shifts across time, language, and literary context. They are not one simple race with one simple role. They belong to a sacred world where divine categories are fluid, layered, and difficult to reduce. That uncertainty is part of their power. The Anunnaki do not always step forward like individual heroes. Often, they appear as a collective presence, a divine assembly, a group of great powers, a council behind the visible drama. They are the background weight of heaven and earth, the unseen structure behind decisions too large for a single human mind. And perhaps that is what makes them so mysterious. A named god can be imagined. A council feels more remote. A god with a temple can be approached. A hidden assembly feels untouchable. A divine figure may speak in myth. A collective of ancient powers may judge in silence. Could the final sign be connected not to the appearance of the gods, but to their refusal to speak clearly? Ancient Mesopotamian religion often imagined the divine world as organized through assemblies. Decisions were not always presented as random acts of isolated gods. The great powers gathered. They decreed. They assigned fates. They approved kingship. They determined destruction or restoration. This structure resembles, in sacred form, the political world of cities, councils, elders, and rulers. Human society imagined heaven through patterns it understood, and heaven gave those patterns terrifying depth. But the assembly also creates distance. If decisions are made in a divine council, humans stand outside the chamber. They experience the result, but not always the discussion. A storm arrives, a city falls, a ruler is lifted up, a plague spreads, a dream terrifies a king, a temple receives a command through ritual. Yet the reason may remain hidden. This is a world ruled by decisions people cannot fully hear. The silence of the Anunnaki is not emptiness. It is withheld explanation. Imagine a night in ancient Nippur. The city is dark except for lamps burning in sacred courtyards. A priest has performed the offering. A musician has sung. A scribe has recorded what was given. The god's name has been honored correctly. The ritual is complete, but nothing answers. No thunder, no dream, no favorable sign, no visible blessing, only the wind passing across brick, reed, and dust. To a modern observer, nothing unusual has happened. To an ancient worshipper, silence could become a question sharp enough to wound. Was the rite accepted? Was the god pleased? Was something omitted? Was the city already under judgment without knowing it? A religion of presence creates a terror of absence. This may help explain why divine withdrawal appears with such force in Mesopotamian emotional life. Texts of lament, prayer, and petition often plead with gods to turn back, to look again, to hear, to restore favor. The worshipper does not always ask for abstract enlightenment. He asks to be noticed. He asks the god's angry heart to calm. He asks that his suffering be seen. The fear is not merely death. The fear is divine inattention. There is a psychological depth here that still feels human. A child fears a parent's anger, but sometimes fears silence more. A people may fear punishment, but also fear abandonment. If the gods strike, at least they are present. If the gods withdraw, the world becomes unreadable. The Anunnaki, as a collective divine power, amplify that dread. They suggest authority beyond personal negotiation. One may pray to a god, appeal to a goddess, serve a temple, or seek a dream. But how does a mortal address an assembly whose decrees shape existence itself? How does a city plead with a council it cannot enter? This is where myth becomes almost political. The human world depends on powers whose meetings are closed. The decrees descend, but the debate remains hidden. In some later Mesopotamian traditions, the Anunnaki are linked with the underworld as judges. This does not mean their identity is only underworldly in every text. It means the tradition evolved. Yet the association is deeply evocative. A divine group that once suggests high cosmic order can also become associated with the realm beneath, with death, verdict, and the fate of souls. Heavenly authority and underworld judgment begin to mirror each other. That shift reveals something profound. The gods are not only builders of civilization, they are also witnesses at the boundary of death. The same divine order that grants kingship and city life may also judge what lies beyond human breath. Their silence is therefore not harmless. It may be the silence of judges who have already heard the case. What would humanity do if the verdict was sealed, but not yet announced? Ancient texts rarely satisfy modern desire for clear timelines. They do not provide a neat prophecy chart. They offer scenes, hymns, fragments, titles, divine names, and symbolic acts. A modern interpretation may suggest that divine distance reflects changing religious imagination as cities grew, empires expanded, and theology became more complex. As political systems became larger, gods may have been imagined with greater majesty and distance. As scribal traditions developed, divine will may have become something interpreted through trained specialists rather than encountered directly by ordinary people. Historians may frame this as cultural development. Myth makes it feel like cosmic retreat. Both perspectives matter. What ancient people described was a living universe full of divine authority. What archaeologists uncover are temples, inscriptions, statues, offering lists, administrative tablets, and destroyed or rebuilt sacred spaces. What historians believe is that religion, power, economy, and kingship were deeply intertwined. What modern interpretations suggest is that divine silence may symbolize social anxiety, political uncertainty, trauma, or the human fear that meaning has withdrawn from the world. But the ancient stories refuse to become only symbols. They preserve the emotional reality of people who believed the gods could turn away. This turning away appears in many forms. A god leaves a city. A goddess descends to a realm where ordinary life is suspended. A king loses divine support. A ritual seeks to bring back favor. A lament cries over a devastated sanctuary. A sufferer begs for a god whose anger he cannot understand. The pattern is not simple disappearance. It is relationship strained to the breaking point. The gods are not dead. They are distant. The gods are not powerless. They are silent. The gods are not forgotten. They are waiting behind the veil of signs. This distinction matters for the idea of return. A god who is gone forever cannot return. A god who is silent can speak again. A divine council that has withdrawn can issue a new decree. An abandoned temple can be restored. A city that mourns can become chosen again. The silence is terrifying because it may be temporary. And what ends divine silence? In ancient Mesopotamian imagination, several possibilities appear. A king may build a temple according to divine instruction. A priest may perform purification. A city may lament until compassion is stirred. A sacred statue may be returned from captivity. A festival may renew the bond between God and people. A divine decree may shift the fate of the land. But there is another possibility, darker than restoration. Silence may end in judgment. The gods may speak only when the waiting is over. This is where the Anunnaki become especially haunting. As a collective image of divine authority, they suggest a decision larger than individual prayer. They evoke a courtroom without walls, a council without visible doors, a verdict forming beyond human hearing. If the world grows corrupt, if kingship loses truth, if temples become empty in spirit, if humans continue performing sacred gestures without sacred fear, then perhaps the silence is not absence. Perhaps it is deliberation. That thought turns every delay into suspense. A quiet sky may not mean indifference. A calm city may not mean safety. A prosperous reign may not mean approval. A ritual completed without disaster may not mean acceptance. The divine assembly could be silent because nothing is happening, or because everything has already been decided. How would anyone know the difference? This question may be why Mesopotamian civilization paid such attention to intermediaries, dreams, diviners, priests, omen scholars, lamentation singers, and kings all stood between human uncertainty and divine secrecy. They tried to interpret the silence. They tried to make the hidden world speak. They tried to hear the decision before it arrived as catastrophe. Yet every interpreter carried risk. A false reading could comfort a doomed city. A true reading could be rejected. A warning could come in a form too strange to trust. A dream could be misunderstood. A sign could be noticed only when its meaning was already irreversible. The Anunnaki remain powerful because they represent the part of the divine world that cannot be domesticated. A city can build a temple, but not force a verdict. A king can make offerings, but not command destiny. A scribe can preserve names, but not compel the gods to answer. There is humility in that, and terror. Humanity stands beneath powers it can name, but not control. The ancient tablets do not prove that divine beings are waiting to reappear in a physical sense. They do not support every modern theory placed upon them. But they do preserve something more ancient than theory. The fear that the world is being judged by powers whose silence should not be mistaken for absence. And if the Anunnaki are silent, the final question becomes unavoidable. Are they gone from the human story? Or are they simply waiting until the moment when silence itself becomes the sign? What if an age does not end all at once? What if it opens like a gate? Ancient Mesopotamians lived with thresholds everywhere. The gate of a city, the gate of a temple, the gate of a palace, the gate of the underworld, the gate of night, the gate of a new month, the gate of a new year. A threshold was not just a place people crossed. It was a dangerous boundary where one condition became another. Inside the city was order. Outside was uncertainty. Inside the temple was holiness. Outside was ordinary life. Inside the king's court was authority. Outside was the restless world of rumor, hunger, labor, and fear. To step through a gate was to change status. A merchant became a petitioner. A ruler became a servant before a god. A statue became a divine presence in procession. A corpse became a traveler toward the land of no return. A festival day became a crack in ordinary time. Could the final sign be hidden in the moment of crossing? The Mesopotamian imagination treated gates with a seriousness that modern people can easily miss. A city gate was not merely a hole in a wall. It was a point of protection, taxation, judgment, announcement, and ritual passage. Legal matters could be witnessed near gates. Enemies tried to break them. Kings boasted of strengthening them. Gods could be invoked to guard them. A broken gate meant more than military weakness. It meant the boundary between order and danger had failed. Temples also had gates, doors, courtyards, inner rooms, and restricted spaces. Not everyone could enter everywhere. Sacred space was graded. The closer one came to the divine center, the more controlled the movement became. Offerings passed inward. Blessing flowed outward. Priests knew the proper words, times, washings, and gestures. This was not casual worship. It was controlled approach. The divine world was powerful enough that access had to be managed. Imagine a great temple at dawn. The outer court is still blue with early light. Servants carry water. Musicians wait with instruments. A priest prepares purification. The doors stand closed. Behind them rests the sacred image, dressed and cared for like a living royal presence. The city is waking, but the god's house has its own rhythm. When the doors open, the moment is not ordinary. It is a controlled encounter between human time and divine presence. Now imagine the doors do not open, or they open on the wrong day, or an eclipse darkens the sky during a ritual, or the king arrives impure, or the sacred statue is absent because it has been taken in war. For ancient people, such disruptions could feel like more than accidents. They could become signs that a threshold had failed. This is where rituals of transition become important. Mesopotamian religion did not only honor the gods during crisis, it created repeated moments where the world was renewed. One of the most famous examples comes from later Babylonian tradition, the New Year festival, often associated with Akitu. This festival is not simply early Sumerian in a narrow sense, but it belongs to the wider Mesopotamian world that inherited and reshaped older sacred ideas. During such festivals, time itself became dramatic. The king could be ritually humbled. The god could be celebrated in procession. Sacred images could move through the city. Myths of cosmic order could be recited or embodied. The community did not merely mark a date. It participated in the renewal of kingship, divine favor, and the structure of the year. What if the year was not guaranteed to continue? That is the fear beneath renewal rituals. A modern calendar turns pages automatically. Ancient sacred time needed confirmation. The new year was not only a number, it was a passage. The world had to cross from one cycle into another without losing divine approval. This makes the gate between ages feel less like fantasy and more like ritual logic. An age changes when the order holding it is either renewed or denied. The gods return when the world becomes able to receive them again. The gods remain distant when the passage fails. Later, Mesopotamian omen traditions reveal how terrifying these moments could be. Eclipses, especially lunar eclipses, were treated as serious signs, often connected with the fate of the king and the land. Scholars and diviners studied the sky for warnings. In some periods, when an eclipse was considered dangerous for the ruler, a substitute king ritual could be performed. A temporary figure might be placed in the royal role so that the evil indicated by the omen would fall upon the substitute rather than the true king. To modern readers, this may sound strange, even theatrical, but to the Mesopotamian mind, kingship was not just political office. The king stood at a cosmic pressure point. If heaven showed danger for the king, then the whole land trembled. The ruler's fate and the land's fate were linked. An omen threatening the king was not private misfortune. It was a wound in the structure of society. The substitute king ritual reveals something extraordinary. A sign did not always have to be passively accepted. It could be answered, redirected, managed through ritual intelligence. Humans could not command the gods, but they could respond to messages with sacred action. That response was a kind of negotiation with fate, not defiance, not control, a desperate attempt to move through a dangerous gate without being destroyed. This is a new form of the final sign. It is not simply a warning that something will happen. It is an invitation to act correctly at the threshold. If the sign is read and answered, the age may continue. If it is ignored, the gate may open into disaster. Eclipses were especially potent because they disturb the most dependable lights. The moon, associated with sacred time, suddenly darkens. The sun, symbol of visibility and order, can be covered. The sky behaves as though the cosmic lamps have been threatened. For people who believed the heavens expressed divine order, such moments were impossible to treat as ordinary. A darkened moon could turn the night into a message. A covered sun could make noon feel like judgment. The visual drama was overwhelming. Animals restless, people staring upward, priests calculating, messengers moving quickly, kings waiting for interpretation. The sky itself seemed to cross a boundary between clarity and terror. Could the gods return through darkness rather than light? That question sounds paradoxical, but ancient ritual often worked through reversal. The king is humbled to renew kingship. A substitute reigns to protect the true ruler. Sacred images leave their sanctuaries so presence can be restored. Lamentation cries out to recover joy. Disorder is ritually acknowledged, so order can be rebuilt. The gate between ages is not gentle. It may require inversion. The old form must bend so it does not break. The person with power must become powerless in ritual. The city that celebrates must first confess danger. The world that seeks renewal must enter symbolic darkness. This is why processions mattered. When a divine statue moved through a city, the god's presence became visible in public space. Streets turned into sacred pathways. Crowds witnessed what was usually hidden. The deity crossed boundaries: inner sanctuary, temple gate, city street, festival house, river route, or another sacred destination. Every movement could carry meaning. A god in procession was not merely an object being carried. In ancient belief, it was the god entering the life of the city. A divine return could therefore be enacted. Not only awaited. This point is crucial. The return of the gods in Mesopotamian thought need not be imagined only as a future descent from the heavens. It could occur ritually whenever divine presence was restored to its proper place. A statue brought back from enemy captivity, a temple rededicated, a festival completed, a king ritually accepted, a dangerous omen neutralized, a sacred calendar corrected. Return could be a passage through a gate, but gates have two directions. The same threshold that admits blessing can admit danger. The same festival that renews order can expose failure. The same omen that warns can condemn if ignored. The same ritual that protects can reveal that protection is no longer possible. Ancient myths of underworld gates deepen this atmosphere. In the story of Inanna's descent, the goddess passes through 7 gates, losing ornaments and powers at each stage. The text belongs to myth, not a manual for political prophecy. Yet its symbolism is unforgettable. To pass through gates is to be stripped. Descent is not travel alone. It is transformation through loss. By the time Inanna reaches the realm below, she is no longer adorned with the powers she carried at the start. A gate can take something from the one who crosses. This gives the threshold a frightening meaning. A civilization passing between ages may not carry everything with it. Some powers fall away. Some symbols lose force. Some kingship becomes empty. Some rituals no longer protect. Some knowledge remains outside the gate, inaccessible to those who inherit the new world. What does an age lose as it crosses? A language, a city, a god's cult, a royal line, a calendar, a memory of what the signs once meant. This is where archaeology becomes haunting. Excavated ruins often reveal layers building, destruction, rebuilding, abandonment, reuse. A temple site may preserve centuries of devotion in stacked remains. One sacred building rises over another. Walls shift. Platforms expand. Names change. Empires come and go. To historians, these layers show cultural continuity and transformation. To the ancient imagination, each rebuilding could feel like passage from one age into another. The ground itself becomes a gate of time. Under one floor lies an older floor. Under one temple lies an earlier temple. Under one city lies a forgotten city. Every generation walks on buried worlds. What if the final sign is not a single event, but the moment when a civilization realizes it is standing on a threshold and does not know which side it belongs to? The Mesopotamian answer was ritual attention. Watch the sky, guard the gates, purify the king, feed the god, read the omens, sing the laments, carry the statue, renew the year, repair the temple, honor the boundary between what humans may do and what only gods decree. But rituals cannot help those who no longer believe thresholds matter. A gate becomes dangerous when people think it is only architecture. An eclipse becomes meaningless when people think heaven has nothing to say. A festival becomes hollow when renewal is performed without fear. A king becomes a costume when sacred responsibility disappears. The ancient world asks us to imagine time as something with doors. Most days pass quietly, but some days open. Most skies shine normally, but some skies darken with meaning. Most rituals repeat, but some repetitions decide whether order continues. And if there is a gate between ages, then the final sign may not announce itself with words. It may appear as a crossing already underway: the darkened moon, the humbled king, the opened temple door, the god carried through the streets, the city trembling at the edge of renewal or ruin. The question is not only what sign appears in heaven or earth. The question is when the gate opens. Who understands that an age is already passing through it? What if the most dangerous king is not the foreign invader, but the ruler who still speaks the sacred words after he has lost the sacred right. Ancient Mesopotamia did not imagine kingship as ordinary human power. A king was not simply the strongest man with the largest army. He was supposed to stand at the meeting point between human order and divine command. He built temples. He judged disputes. He protected fields. He honored gods. He defended the vulnerable, at least in royal ideology. He carried the burden of the city before powers greater than himself. But this created a terrifying possibility. If a true king could become the visible servant of divine order, then a false king could become the perfect disguise of disorder. He could wear the crown. He could enter the temple. He could offer sacrifices. He could inscribe his name on brick. He could call himself chosen, beloved, mighty, shepherd, protector, servant of the gods. And still, beneath the sacred language, the relationship could be broken. How would anyone know? This question haunted the ancient Near Eastern imagination because kingship depended on recognition. People had to believe the ruler stood inside a legitimate order. Priests had to serve under him. Scribes had to write his titles. Armies had to obey his commands. Cities had to accept his authority. The gods, in the language of the texts, had to approve. But approval is invisible. A crown can be seen. Divine favor cannot. That gap between appearance and truth is where the false king enters. He is not always a villain in black robes. He may be successful. He may conquer enemies. He may expand walls, build canals, commission statues, and speak beautifully about justice. His danger lies in the possibility that visible success can be mistaken for divine acceptance. Could prosperity itself become a mask? Sumerian and later Mesopotamian texts preserve repeated anxiety about rulers who fail in their sacred duties. Modern historians understand royal inscriptions as political documents. Kings used them to present themselves as chosen, just, powerful, and obedient to the gods. These inscriptions must not be read naively as neutral reports. They are acts of royal image-making. Yet they also reveal what kings believed they had to claim. A ruler had to say he restored order. A ruler had to say he honored the gods. A ruler had to say he protected the land. A ruler had to say justice mattered. That means the opposite was feared. In the city of Lagash, one of the most famous early reform traditions is associated with Uruinim-Gina, also known as Uruk-Agina. The inscriptions connected with his reign describe abuses, corruption, and attempts to restore proper order. Modern scholars debate details and recognize the political purpose behind the texts, but the image is powerful officials taking too much. Powerful people exploiting weaker people. Temple property and social obligations becoming distorted. Whether every claim reflects reality exactly is not the central point for this mystery. The central point is that ancient royal ideology already understood corruption as a sacred problem. A dishonest official was not merely inefficient. A greedy elite was not merely unpleasant. A ruler who allowed exploitation was not merely unpopular. He threatened the moral structure that made the city livable under the gods. Imagine a marketplace in a Sumerian city. The heat is harsh. Traders weigh barley. Wool changes hands. A widow argues over debt. A worker waits for rations. A temple representative records deliveries. A scribe presses numbers into clay. Nothing here looks cosmic. It looks ordinary, human, economic. But ancient order could be broken in exactly such places. A weight altered slightly. A measure falsified. A field taken from someone without power. A debt enforced without mercy. A temple office used for private gain. What if judgment begins not in the sky, but at the scale of grain? This is where the false king becomes more frightening than the tyrant who openly rejects the gods. An openly godless ruler, in ancient terms, would be easy to identify. The false king is harder. He continues the rituals while hollowing out their meaning. He honors the divine names while ignoring the justice those names demand. He decorates the temple while draining the people. He speaks of order while building a world of fear. The outer pattern remains. The inner covenant rots. Ancient texts do not use this exact modern language, and we must not force later concepts onto Sumer. Still, the structure is present. Rulers are judged by whether they maintain divine and social order. When they fail, disaster can be described not as random misfortune, but as the exposure of false legitimacy. The Curse of Agade, a later Mesopotamian literary composition concerning the Akkadian Empire, gives a dramatic example of royal failure turned cosmic disaster. It tells of Naram Sin, the mighty king of Akkad, offending the gods and bringing ruin upon his city. Historians do not treat the text as a simple eyewitness report. It is literature, theology, political memory, and warning. But its message is unforgettable. Even a great empire can collapse when royal power violates sacred boundaries. In that story world, the king's strength becomes his danger. He does not fall because he is weak. He falls because he imagines power can force what only divine order can grant. This is one of the oldest warnings in political mythology. The false king is not always the failed king. Sometimes he is the king who wins too much, builds too high, speaks too boldly, and mistakes momentum for destiny. Could victory be the final temptation before judgment? A city may cheer conquest. Scribes may record tribute. Soldiers may return with spoils. Temples may receive gifts. The ruler's name may seem larger than life. Yet ancient literature often asks a darker question: did the king remain a servant of the divine order? Or did he begin to act as though the order served him? The difference is subtle until it becomes catastrophic. A true king builds a temple because the god commands it. A false king builds a temple to trap the god inside his glory. A true king judges because justice preserves the land. A false king judges to make fear look like law. A true king carries sacred titles as burden. A false king wears them as armor. This distinction cannot always be measured by archaeology. Excavations can reveal palaces, temples, tablets, destruction layers, administrative systems, and changes in settlement. They cannot directly excavate the sincerity of a king. Historians must work through inscriptions, material remains, comparative evidence, and political context. Ancient texts, however, speak from within a religious imagination that believed sincerity, order, and divine approval mattered deeply. That is why the false king is such a powerful figure. He represents the problem that evidence can see only indirectly legitimacy corrupted from within. In some Mesopotamian traditions, the gods may raise up one ruler and cast down another. This does not mean every ancient author agreed on every event or that every king's claim was accepted. Competing cities could tell competing stories. One ruler's restoration could be another city's trauma. A conqueror might call himself chosen, while the conquered remembered him as a destroyer. So who decides which king is false? That question reveals the tension at the heart of ancient political theology. Royal inscriptions usually speak with certainty. Laments speak with grief. Myths speak through symbols. Administrative tablets speak through numbers. Archaeology speaks through remains. None gives the whole reality alone. The false king hides in the spaces between them. He may appear righteous in his own inscriptions and cursed in another tradition. He may repair one temple while destroying another city's sanctuary. He may bring order to the capital while crushing the provinces. He may be remembered differently depending on who holds the stylus. This makes scribes central to the mystery. The king ruled with armies, but memory ruled with writing. A scribe could preserve a royal name for millennia. A scribe could copy a lament that turned victory into horror. A scribe could transmit a myth in which arrogance invites divine abandonment. Writing did not only record authority, it judged it across time. The clay tablet becomes a courtroom. The dead king cannot defend himself. The broken city still testifies. The god's silence becomes part of the evidence. In this sense, the final sign before judgment may be the collapse of truthful naming. When a destroyer is called shepherd, when greed is called restoration, when fear is called order, when a king's glory becomes louder than the cries of the city, when sacred titles continue, but no one remembers what they were meant to restrain. Ancient Mesopotamians understood that names had power. To name a ruler just was to place him inside a sacred expectation. To name him beloved of a god was to claim a relationship beyond human politics. But when titles become empty, language itself becomes dangerous. The false king rules not only through soldiers, but through corrupted meaning. This is why judgment in ancient literature often feels like unveiling. The city discovers what was hidden. The ruler's strength reveals itself as arrogance. The temple's beauty reveals itself as hollow. The prosperity of the land reveals itself as temporary mercy. The gods do not always need to create a new disaster. Sometimes they allow the true nature of a reign to become visible. That unveiling may be the most feared sign of all. Because when the false king is finally exposed, it means the protection of illusion has ended. The people can no longer pretend that ritual alone will save them. The priests can no longer hide behind procedure. The scribes can no longer decorate collapse with perfect titles. The ruler can no longer confuse obedience with blessing. The city must face the possibility that its highest office has become the doorway through which disorder entered. Yet the false king is not only an ancient figure, he is a pattern preserved in sacred memory. He appears whenever power imitates holiness without humility. Whenever authority uses divine language but refuses accountability. Whenever a society mistakes spectacle for legitimacy. Whenever people are trained to applaud the crown while ignoring the wound beneath it. Ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian traditions do not offer a single, simple prophecy about one final ruler before the return of the gods. That would be a modern simplification. What they offer is more disturbing. A repeated warning that kingship, the very institution meant to preserve order, can become the instrument of cosmic disorder. And once that happens, the sign is no longer hidden. It sits on the throne. It speaks in decrees. It walks into temples. It commands armies. It smiles from inscriptions meant to last forever. The question is not whether a false king can fool the people. History shows that power often does. The question is more frightening if a false king can keep the rituals, wear the titles, and command the scribes. What sign remains strong enough to reveal that judgment has already begun? What if the gods did not return from the sky because they had never truly left it? To the ancient Mesopotamian imagination, the night was not darkness. It was a manuscript. Each star was a mark. Each planet was a moving sign. Each rising, disappearance, brightening, delay, and strange wandering could become part of a language older than kings and deeper than ordinary speech. Modern people look upward and see distance. Ancient priests looked upward and saw relationship. The sky was not merely above humanity. It watched humanity. It measured kings. It reflected divine emotion. It revealed danger in patterns too slow for the careless and too subtle for the proud. A star did not have to fall to become terrifying. A planet only had to appear in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong color, near the wrong constellation, and suddenly the fate of a king could tremble. Could the final sign be not a new star, but an old star returning in a way no one expected? This possibility leads into one of Mesopotamia's most mysterious developments, astral divination. The earliest Sumerians certainly watched the heavens, marked lunar months, honored celestial gods, and bound ritual life to sacred time. The vast technical systems of omen interpretation became especially developed in later Babylonian and Assyrian scholarship. But they grew from a deep Mesopotamian conviction that heaven and earth belonged to one connected order. The sky was a surface of divine writing. The scholar was a reader. The king was often the subject of the message. This is why later omen collections became so immense. Scribes compiled observations linking celestial phenomena with events on Earth. They watched the moon, sun, planets, stars, clouds, storms, halos, and strange atmospheric appearances. They studied not only what happened in heaven, but where it happened, when it happened, and what earthly region it might affect. A sign in the west might concern one land. A sign in the east might concern another. A planet near a certain star might speak of kingship, war, famine, rebellion, or divine anger. To modern astronomy, the planet is a body moving according to physical law. To the ancient omen scholar, that motion could still be lawful, but the law was meaningful. The heavens did not move randomly. Their order was precisely why they could be read. What if regularity itself was the code? Among the celestial powers, no figure burns with more symbolic force than Inanna, known in Akkadian as Ishtar. She was associated with the planet Venus, the brilliant star of morning and evening. This identification does not reduce the goddess to a planet. Inanna was far more than a light in the sky. She was love, war, desire, royal power, beauty, terror, fertility, ambition, and reversal. She could bless a king and destroy him. She could descend to the underworld and rise again. She could appear radiant, vanish, and return. Venus made that drama visible. It appears as the evening star, disappears into the sun's glare, emerges as the morning star, and repeats its cycle with a brilliance that arrests the eye. No telescope is needed. No mathematics is required to feel its strangeness. Venus is not like the fixed stars. It wanders. It dominates twilight. It appears, disappears, and reappears like a divine presence moving between worlds. Could the return of a goddess be encoded in the behavior of a planet? Ancient texts did connect divine beings with celestial bodies, but care is needed. They were not writing modern astrophysics, and they were not describing spacecraft. They were expressing a sacred correspondence between heavenly appearance and divine identity. The planet's cycle became a visible emblem of Inanna's paradoxical nature, near and absent, luminous and dangerous, erotic and martial, heavenly and underworldly. Inanna's descent myth gives this symbolism an emotional depth. The goddess leaves the upper world and enters the land of death. As she passes through gates, her powers are stripped away. Life above begins to fail. Only through complex divine intervention does she return. The myth is not simply astronomy, but the pattern resonates with celestial disappearance and reappearance. The brightest figure vanishes. The world feels diminished. Then the light returns from another side of the sky. What would such a return mean to a people trained to see heaven as message? Not every appearance of Venus was an omen of catastrophe. Ancient interpretation depended on context, but Venus was watched closely because its divine associations were intense. The goddess who shines as morning star can be warrior. The goddess who shines as evening star can be lover. The same light carries two faces. The same return may promise blessing or announce violence. This double nature makes the star dangerous. A sign that looks beautiful may not be gentle. A brilliant light may not mean peace. A returning goddess may come crowned with desire or armed for battle. The ancient world understood that divine beauty could wound. Now picture a Babylonian scholar on a flat rooftop in the cool hours before dawn. The city is not yet awake. The temple precinct is dark. The air smells of dust and ash. He watches the horizon, waiting for a planet to rise. Beside him is not myth alone, but discipline records, inherited interpretations, lists of stars, months, regions, and possible outcomes. The scholar is not guessing in a casual way. He belongs to a tradition that treats observation as sacred responsibility. A faint light appears. It is expected, yet still unsettling, because even an expected return can carry a message. This is one of the strangest aspects of Mesopotamian omen thought. The sky did not need to break its laws to speak. The meaning could lie in timing, brightness, relation, delay, or position. A returning star was not automatically extraordinary, but its exact return could be interpreted as part of a divine conversation. Modern astronomy asks, what is its orbit? Ancient divination asked, what does its appearance mean for the land? Both questions begin with looking up, but they travel to different worlds. Another important celestial idea is the crossing point. In Mesopotamian astronomy and mythology, certain stars, constellations, and planetary positions marked regions of heaven. Later texts contain names and classifications that helped scholars organize the sky. One famous and often misunderstood term is Nibiru. In some ancient contexts, Nibiru can refer to a crossing point, or celestial body associated with such a concept, depending on the text. Modern speculative theories have transformed it into many unsupported claims, especially ideas about a hidden planet returning to destroy or transform Earth. Those claims are not established by ancient evidence, yet the original concept remains fascinating without exaggeration. A crossing point in heaven is already powerful, a place where movement changes meaning, a marker between regions, a celestial sign tied to transition. The sky itself contains gates. This idea adds a new layer to the mystery of divine return. Perhaps the star that signals return is not simply one bright body, but a heavenly crossing. A moment when a wandering light enters a meaningful region, a movement through a boundary, a visible passage that mirrors a hidden decree. To an omen scholar, location mattered. A planet was not interpreted in isolation. It belonged to a map of meaning. The sky was divided, named, organized, and linked with divine powers. When a celestial body crossed a boundary, the event could be read like a royal messenger entering a city gate. Who sent the messenger? Which land was addressed? Was the message blessing, warning, or judgment? The more carefully the sky was mapped, the more meaningful motion became. This is why the star can be both scientific and sacred in ancient life. Mesopotamian scholars made real observations. They developed mathematical astronomy over long periods. They recorded patterns with impressive care, but their knowledge did not remove divine meaning. In their world, calculation and omen could stand near each other. Predictability did not empty the heavens of mystery. It made the mystery legible. This challenges modern assumptions. Many people imagine that a predicted event cannot be sacred. For ancient Mesopotamians, the reverse could be true. If an event followed a divine order, Then its regularity revealed the stability of the powers behind it. The gods did not need chaos to communicate. Order itself was their script. Still, an ordered sky could deliver terrifying messages. A planet associated with war appearing in a dangerous configuration. A star linked with kingship dimming or being obscured. A bright body crossing a region connected with enemy lands. A heavenly sign interpreted as rebellion, famine, or the death of a ruler. The sign did not have to be understood by the crowd. It had to be understood by those responsible for reading the divine language. This creates an uneasy social reality. The people might sleep while the scholar watched. The king might feast while the omen tablet suggested danger. The city might appear calm while heaven quietly rearranged its warnings overhead. The final sign, if imagined through this system, would not necessarily be spectacular to everyone. It might be a technical sign, a specialist's terror, a meaning hidden in a pattern most eyes would miss. That makes it more frightening, not less, because an unread sign is still a sign. In the popular imagination, the return of the gods often appears as a dramatic descent, blazing lights, shaking earth, beings appearing openly. But ancient Mesopotamian astral thought suggests a subtler possibility. Divine return may begin as recognition. The star appears. The trained watcher understands. The king is warned. Rituals are ordered. The land waits to see whether the sign can be answered. The gods return first as meaning. Only later does history reveal whether the reading was true. This is why the planet Venus, the crossing of heavenly bodies, and the mapping of stars matter so deeply. They show a civilization trying to live inside a universe where no bright object was merely beautiful and no darkness was merely empty. The sky was alive with memory. Every night placed humanity beneath a script older than its cities. But one danger remained. What happens when the readers are gone? The scribal schools vanish. The old languages fall silent. The temples are buried. The gods lose their daily offerings. The star still rises, but the meanings once attached to it are fractured, debated, or forgotten. Modern astronomy can tell us where Venus will appear. Archaeology can uncover tablets describing ancient interpretations. Historians can reconstruct parts of the celestial system. But the living fear of the omen, the trembling moment when a scholar saw a sign and believed a kingdom had been addressed by heaven, is almost impossible to fully recover. The star remains. The old reading is broken, and perhaps that is the strangest sign of all. Not a star appearing for the first time, but a star returning to a world that no longer remembers how to hear it. In the end, the ancient sky does not give a simple prophecy. It gives a question carved in light. If the gods once spoke through stars, planets, crossings, disappearances, and returns, then what does it mean when the same lights still move above us, while the language that gave them sacred meaning lies buried in clay? And if the final sign were written in the heavens, would humanity recognize the message or only admire the star? What if the final sign was not meant to predict the gods' return, but to reveal whether humanity could still remember them? That possibility is more unsettling than any spectacular prophecy. A comet can be seen, a flood can be felt, a ruined city can be excavated, a broken temple can be mapped. But memory is quieter. It disappears without thunder. It fades while people continue speaking, trading, ruling, building, and praying. It vanishes not when the last tablet breaks, but when the living no longer know how to read what the dead tried to preserve. The ancient Sumerian world was built on remembrance. Names had to be spoken. Offerings had to be repeated. Festivals had to return. The calendar had to be watched. The god's house had to be maintained. Kings had to remember that authority was not theirs by nature. Scribes had to copy texts that came from hands older than their own. Every act of civilization depended on continuity. A forgotten sign is more dangerous than a hidden sign, because a hidden sign can still be found. A forgotten sign may appear openly and mean nothing. This is the final, haunting shape of the mystery. Ancient texts do not give one clean sentence declaring the final sign before the gods return. Archaeologists have not uncovered a single tablet that functions like a countdown. Historians do not treat Sumerian mythology as a literal timetable for divine arrival. Modern interpretations that claim the tablets secretly predict a physical return of the Anunnaki go beyond the evidence. Yet the texts do preserve a pattern too powerful to ignore. The gods grant order. Humans build cities. Kingship descends. Temples rise. Rituals sustain the bond. Then something breaks. A ruler becomes arrogant. A city becomes corrupt. A temple is abandoned. The rivers overwhelm the land. A divine decree is disturbed. The heavens display warnings. The people continue living, but the sacred pattern underneath their world begins to loosen. The final sign may be that loosening, not one event, but the moment when all the old bonds fail at once. Ancient texts describe divine withdrawal, cosmic decrees, sacred cities, flood judgment, heavenly omens, and the terrifying silence of powers beyond human command. Archaeologists know that Mesopotamian cities really did rise, fall, flood, burn, rebuild, and disappear into layers of earth. Historians believe these stories reflect a world where religion, kingship, ecology, economy, and political legitimacy were inseparable. Modern interpretations suggest that the return of the gods may symbolize the return of order after collapse, the renewal of sacred authority, or the human longing for meaning when civilization feels unstable. But none of those explanations fully empties the mystery. Why did the oldest literate civilizations imagine history as something watched? Why did they believe power above humanity could leave traces below? Why did they preserve memories of destruction beside hymns of praise? A purely political civilization does not need gods to abandon cities. It can simply say armies won and rulers failed. A purely agricultural civilization does not need divine councils to explain rivers. It can simply say the water rose. A purely administrative civilization does not need myths of stolen destiny. It can simply record who controlled grain, labor, land, and temples. But Sumer did something deeper. It turned history into a sacred warning. The world was not only managed, it was entrusted. This word matters, entrusted. Human beings were not portrayed as owners of the cosmic order. They were participants in it. Cities did not exist outside divine reality. They stood within it. The temple was not decoration. It was a point of contact. The king was not merely successful. He was responsible. The sky was not merely beautiful. It was legible. Water was not merely useful. It could become chaos. Writing was not merely record-keeping. It was memory against oblivion. And perhaps this is why clay matters so much. Clay is humble. It comes from earth and water. It can be shaped by hand, marked with a reed, dried by sun, hardened by fire, buried by disaster, and recovered after thousands of years. The same material used for bricks, bowls, seals, tablets, and walls became the skin of ancient memory. Sumerian scribes did not carve their warnings into immortal crystal. They pressed them into mud. That mud survived empires. It survived languages. It survived gods losing their temples. It survived the people who believed the gods might return. There is something almost impossible about that. A scribe makes a mark in wet clay, perhaps for a school exercise, a hymn, a royal claim, a myth, a lament, or a ritual text. He cannot see the future. He cannot imagine museum lights, digital catalogs, academic debates, or distant viewers listening to the names of his gods through machines of glass and electricity. Yet his marks travel farther than kings. The tablet becomes a witness. It does not prove every myth literally happened. It does not turn speculation into fact. It does not allow modern fantasies to replace disciplined evidence. But it does prove that ancient people cared enough to preserve a world of signs, gods, fears, and questions. That preservation may itself be the final sign remembered. The warning was not merely, "The gods will return." The warning was, "Do not forget how a world collapses when it believes it no longer has to listen." This changes the meaning of return. A god's return may not require a body descending through clouds. In the ancient religious imagination, divine return could mean the restoration of presence, authority, justice, order, and sacred relationship, a temple rebuilt, a calendar renewed, a king humbled, a corrupt order exposed, a forgotten name spoken again, a broken people remembering that civilization is fragile. To modern viewers, such a return may be symbolic. To ancient worshippers, it could be real in the deepest possible sense. The god returns when the world becomes aligned enough to receive the god. The god remains absent when human order becomes too false to hold divine presence. That is the terrifying moral architecture hidden inside the clay. The final sign, then, may not appear as a single object. It may appear as a convergence. Temples still stand, but feel empty. Leaders still speak of order, but no longer serve truth. The sky still moves, but no one reads it with humility. The rivers still nourish, but human ambition forgets the cost of maintenance. Sacred language remains, but is used to defend power rather than restrain it. Old warnings survive, but are treated as entertainment instead of memory. At that point, the world does not need new omens. It has become the omen. This is why the Sumerian imagination continues to disturb the modern mind. It does not only ask what happened thousands of years ago, it asks what kind of blindness belongs to civilization itself. The greater a society becomes, the easier it is to believe that its systems are permanent. Walls seem strong. Records seem complete. Markets seem rational. Leaders seem necessary. Technology seems unstoppable. The ancient Sumerians knew another truth. Cities can vanish while their people still believe they are standing at the center of the world. Uruk fell silent. Eridu became a ruin. Nippur lost its old sacred authority. Lagash became memory. Ur's moonlit sanctuaries became archaeology. The gods who once received offerings there no longer dwell in those temples as living cults, yet their names remain alive in texts, in scholarship, in imagination, and in the strange modern hunger to understand what the first cities believed. Is that survival accidental, or did the scribes succeed in preserving the one thing collapse could not drown? Burn or bury. Memory. There is a deep irony in the search for the god's return. Many look for a future event, a visible arrival, a spectacular confirmation that the ancient world knew something modernity forgot. But the tablets may be asking for a different kind of attention. They may be asking whether humanity can recognize the return of old patterns' arrogance before collapse, silence before judgment, false kingship before ruin, cosmic order forgotten beneath human confidence. In that sense, the ancient sign is never finished. It repeats wherever civilization mistakes power for legitimacy. It repeats wherever sacred language loses truth. It repeats wherever warnings survive but are not understood. It repeats wherever people inherit ruins and imagine they are immune to becoming one. This does not mean Sumerian texts secretly predicted the modern world. That would be too simple, and it would disrespect the ancient material. The Sumerians were not writing for modern conspiracy theories. They were preserving their own sacred universe, their own fears, their own explanations for order and disaster. But great myths outlive their original world because they touch patterns that return in human life. A flood is also overwhelm. A stolen destiny is also corrupted authority. A silent god is also the terror of meaning withdrawn. A false king is also power emptied of justice. A star is also the hope that darkness still contains a message. A ruined city is also a warning that permanence is an illusion. So what was the final sign before the gods' return? The honest answer is that no single ancient Sumerian tablet gives us that phrase as a fixed prophecy. The deeper answer is that the Sumerian world imagined many final signs: loss of order, failure of kingship, broken ritual, divine silence, celestial warning, flood, corruption, and forgetting. Each sign points toward the same fear. The bond between heaven and earth can fail, and humanity may notice only when the waters are already rising. At the beginning of this mystery stood a question: what if the gods did not vanish, but left signs behind? The clay tablets offer no easy certainty. They do not hand us a date. They do not give us a map of returning beings. They do not remove doubt. Instead, they leave us with something older and more powerful than certainty: the image of human civilization standing beneath a watching sky, surrounded by ruins of cities that once believed their gods would protect them forever. Perhaps the most important revelation is not that the gods might return. Perhaps it is that the signs never stopped appearing. And if the last sign is the moment humanity forgets how to recognize a warning, then what would the gods need to do to make themselves known again?